History remembers the scandals that were shouted, but the most dangerous truths are always the ones whispered in the dark. In 1842, the Duke of Ashbourne didn't just break a heart. He shattered the entire social hierarchy of London in a single heartbeat. Everyone knew Lady Cecilia was destined to wear his ring. She was beautiful, cruel, and powerful. But the moment the music stopped, the Duke didn't walk toward the woman in the red silk dress. He walked past her and knelt before the invisible girl in the corner that no one knew existed. What happens when the most powerful man in England begs a wallflower for mercy? The answer will shock you. This is the story of the Duke's penance. October 14th, 1842. The grand ballroom of the Harrington estate. London. The chandeliers of Harrington House were not merely sources of light. They were judgmental eyes, thousands of crystal prisms, fracturing the candlelight and casting it upon the sins of the London elite. The air smelled of expensive French powder beeswax and the metallic tang of ambition. Lady Cecilia Thorne stood at the precipice of the grand staircase, her hand resting lightly on the velvet railing. She paused, not because she needed to catch her breath, but because she knew the power of an entrance. She wore crimson, a scandalous, violent shade of red silk imported from the East Indies that clung to her figure in a way that made dowagers gasp and men adjust their cravats. "She looks like she's already won," whispered a young debutante near the orchestra pit, hiding her mouth behind a fan. "She has," replied her mother, a bitter woman named Lady Agatha. The Duke of Ashbourne has been seen leaving her townhouse 3 times this week. The announcement is merely a formality at this point. Tonight is her coronation. Cecilia descended the stairs, her eyes scanning the crowd with the predatory grace of a hawk circling a field of field mice. She didn't smile. Queens did not smile at their subjects. They merely acknowledged their existence. In her mind, the script was already written. Arthur, the Duke of Ashbourne, would arrive at midnight. He would claim the first waltz after the supper break. He would lead her to the center of the room, and he would propose. It was the transaction she had been orchestrating for 3 social seasons. She reached the bottom of the stairs and was immediately swarmed by a gaggle of sycophants. "Lady Cecilia, radiant as always," Lord Archibald stammered, bowing too low. "Red is your colour, truly," simpered a rival who had tried and failed to capture the Duke's attention the previous winter. Cecilia accepted their praise with a bored tilt of her head. "Where is the Duke?" she asked, her voice like crushed velvet. "I was told he returned from his estate in Derbyshire this morning." "He is expected momentarily," Archibald said, "though there is a rumour." Cecilia's eyes narrowed. "A rumour that he brought a guest," Archibald whispered, leaning in. "Someone unexpected." Cecilia laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Arthur has no guests that I do not approve of. He is a creature of habit, and I am his habit." She pushed past them, making her way toward the center of the room. As she moved, the crowd parted, creating a wide berth for her crimson dress. She felt the weight of their envy. It fueled her. She had been born the daughter of a viscount with gambling debts, but she would die a duchess. However, in the shadow of a large potted fern near the servants' entrance, a very different reality was unfolding. Miss Sarah Evesham adjusted her spectacles, wishing the ground would simply open up and swallow her whole. She was 22, but she felt 100 years old. Her dress was a pale, washed-out grey muslin that had been turned twice and patched at the hem. It was the colour of dishwater, blending perfectly with the wallpaper. "Stand up straight, Sarah," hissed her aunt, Mrs. Beatrice Halloway. Beatrice was a pinch-faced woman who viewed Sarah not as a niece, but as a charitable burden she couldn't wait to offload. "You look like a wilted cabbage." "I don't want to be here, Aunt Beatrice," Sarah whispered, clutching her dance card, which remained blissfully empty. "I should be at home." The apothecary said, "Father's cough is worse." "Your father is a fool who lost his fortune on steam engine patents that never worked," Beatrice snapped. "And you are the daughter of a fool. This ball is your last chance to find a widower or a desperate merchant. Look, there's Mr. Collins. He's 50, has gout, and owns a textile mill. Smile at him." Sarah felt a wave of nausea. She didn't want a textile mill. She wanted her books, her father's blueprints, and the quiet dignity of being left alone. She looked across the room and saw Lady Cecilia in her red dress, commanding the room like a deity. "Look at her," Beatrice muttered, following Sarah's gaze. "That is what a woman should be. Lady Cecilia knows how to play the game. You, Sarah, don't even know the rules." "I despise the game," Sarah said softly. "That is why you will die a spinster," Beatrice replied cruelly. Suddenly, the music stopped. The chatter died down, instantly replaced by a hush so profound one could hear the wax dripping from the candles. The major domo at the top of the stairs struck his staff against the floor 3 times. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "His Grace!" The major domo bellowed, his voice trembling slightly. "Arthur Pendleton, Duke of Ashbourne!" Sarah's breath hitched. She hadn't seen him in 10 years. Not since they were children playing in the mud near the border of their father's estates, before the scandal, before the poverty, before he became the cold duke and she became the invisible girl. Cecilia straightened her spine, smoothing the silk at her hips. It is time, she thought. The coronation begins. Arthur Pendleton stood at the top of the stairs. He was a man who seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Tall, broad-shouldered and dressed in severe black evening wear, he looked less like a romantic hero and more like an executioner. His face was hard, the angles sharp, his jaw set in a line of grim determination. There was a scar running through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a duel fought in Paris 3 years ago that gave him a permanent expression of skepticism. He did not look happy to be there. In fact, he looked furious. "He looks magnificent," Cecilia whispered to herself, taking a step forward, ensuring she was the focal point of his descent. She composed her face into a smile of welcoming intimacy, the kind of smile that told the room, "He belongs to me." Arthur began to descend. His steps were heavy, deliberate. Thud. 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 The crowd watched, mesmerized. Every eye in the room darted between the Duke and Lady Cecilia. It was the climax of the season's greatest drama. They waited for him to reach the bottom to take her hand to seal the alliance. Arthur reached the ballroom floor. The crowd parted further, creating a direct aisle between him and Cecilia. It was a red carpet made of parquet flooring. Cecilia extended her hand, palm down, ready to be kissed. "Arthur," she purred, her voice carrying in the silent room. "We have been waiting." Arthur kept walking. He moved with a terrifying velocity. His eyes were fixed forward, staring unblinkingly. He approached Cecilia. Her smile faltered slightly. He was moving too fast. He wasn't slowing down to bow. "Arthur," she said, her voice pitching up, losing its velvet control. And then the impossible happened. The Duke of Ashbourne, did not stop. He did not take her hand. He did not even look at her. The air from his passing movement ruffled the feathers in her hair. He walked past her as if she were a piece of furniture, as if she were a ghost, as if she were nothing. A collective gasp ripped through the room. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. Lady Cecilia froze her hand, still extended in the air, grasping at nothing. Her face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of paste beneath her rouge. The humiliation was absolute. It was a social execution. But Arthur was not finished. He continued his march, cutting through the throng of bewildered aristocrats. He moved past the dowagers, past the politicians, past the wealthy merchants. He was heading toward the darkest corner of the room, the corner near the servants' entrance, the corner where the wallflowers wilted. Beatrice Halloway's eyes went wide. She grabbed Sro's arm, digging her fingernails in. "He's coming this way," she hissed. "Move, you stupid girl. He's coming to speak to Lord Harrington behind us." Sro couldn't move. Her legs had turned to stone. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same look he'd had when they were 12, and he'd promised her he would fix her broken kite. Intensity. Focus. Arthur stopped. He was standing 3 feet away from Sarah. The contrast was jarring. The most powerful man in London, dripping in wealth and authority, standing before a girl in a grey mended dress, with ink stains on her fingers. The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop. Arthur looked down at her. His cold expression fractured, revealing something raw and terrifyingly vulnerable underneath. He looked at her mismatched eyes, one blue, one green, hidden behind her spectacles. He looked at the fraying collar of her dress. "Sarah," he said. His voice was rough like gravel grinding together. "Your Grace," Sarah whispered, dropping into a clumsy curtsy, her knees shaking. You shouldn't be here." "I have been a blind fool," Arthur announced, his voice raising so the entire room could hear. "I have spent 10 years running from the past, trying to bury it in noise and vice." He took a step closer. Sarah stepped back, hitting the wall. There was nowhere to run. "Arthur, please," she begged quietly. "People are staring." "Let them stare," he growled. "Let them see." Then the Duke of Ashbourne did the one thing that no duke had ever done in the history of the peerage. He didn't bow. He dropped to his knees. The sound of his knees hitting the floor echoed. He knelt on the hard wood, disregarding his tailored trousers, disregarding his dignity. He knelt at the feet of the girl in the grey dress. He reached out and took her trembling, calloused hand in his. "Sarah Evesham," he said, looking up at her with eyes that burned. "I have broken every vow I ever made save one. The one I made to you in the oak tree, when we were children." From the center of the room, Lady Cecilia let out a strangled cry of rage, but no one looked at her. "Get up, Arthur!" Sarah hissed, tears pricking her eyes. "You are ruining yourself." "I am saving myself," he corrected. He pulled a folded, yellowing piece of parchment from his breast pocket. It was old, stained with water and age. "I found the letter, Sarah. I found the letter your father sent to mine before he died. I know the truth." Sarah stopped breathing. The blood rushed from her head. "No," she breathed. "You cannot know that. I know that my father didn't just bankrupt yours," Arthur said, his voice shaking with suppressed fury. "I know he stole the patent. I know that every penny of the Ashbourne fortune, every brick of my estate, the clothes on my back, the wine in my cellar, it all belongs to you." The crowd erupted into chaos. Arthur gripped her hand tighter. "I am not the Duke," he declared, his voice ringing out over the noise. "I am a fraud, and you, Sarah, you are the owner of everything I have." He pressed his forehead against her hand. "I am not asking for your hand in marriage, Sarah. I have no right. I am asking for your mercy. Will you evict me tonight, or will you allow me time to repay the debt my family owes yours?" Sarah looked down at the man kneeling before her. She looked across the room at Lady Cecilia, who was now being held up by two friends to keep from fainting. She looked at her Aunt Beatrice, whose mouth was hanging open like a caught fish. Sarah Evesham. The invisible girl slowly pulled her hand away from the Duke's grasp. She adjusted her glasses, her fear suddenly replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. "Stand up, Mr. Pendleton," she said, her voice cutting through the whispers. "We have business to discuss, and I prefer not to do it while you are on the floor." 1 hour later, the Duke's carriage travelling through the fog of London. The interior of the carriage was stiflingly silent. The velvet seats, usually a comfort, felt like a prison cell. Arthur sat on one side, staring out at the gaslit streets of London rolling by. Sarah sat opposite him. She had refused to return to her aunt's house. After the revelation in the ballroom, Beatrice had tried to embrace Sarah, calling her "my dearest niece." But Sarah had simply walked past her, emulating the Duke's earlier dismissal, and climbed into Arthur's carriage. "You realize you destroyed my life back there," Sarah said. She wasn't yelling. Her tone was factual, analytical. It was the voice of the engineer's daughter. Arthur turned to look at her. The adrenaline of the ballroom was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. "I destroyed a lie, Sarah. There is a difference." "You could have come to me privately," Sarah countered. "You could have sent a solicitor. You didn't have to humiliate yourself and Lady Cecilia in front of the entire peerage." "Cecilia needed to know she holds no power over me," Arthur said darkly. "She has been blackmailing me for months, threatening to reveal the theft of the patent if I didn't marry her. She thought she held the leverage." Sarah's eyes widened behind her spectacles. "Blackmail? How did she know?" "Because—" Arthur sighed, running a hand through his hair, disrupting the perfect styling. "She was sleeping with the family solicitor. She found the original deed before I did. She has a copy, Sarah. Tonight was a preemptive strike. By revealing it myself, I took away her weapon. But I also destroyed my reputation." "And mine," Sarah added. "Do you think they will accept me, a penniless spinster who suddenly owns the Ashbourne Duchy's assets? They will say I bewitched you. They will say I forged the documents." "Let them talk," Arthur said. "I don't care about them. I care about the debt." He leaned forward, the carriage rocking as it hit a cobblestone. "My father was a monster, Sarah. He didn't just steal the steam governor patent from your father. He ensured your father was blacklisted, so he couldn't fight back. I found his diary 3 days ago. It detailed everything. The bribes, the sabotage." He looked at her with intense regret. "I lived in a palace built on your father's bones. And you? You were starving in a drafty attic with that harpy Beatrice." Sarah looked away, staring at her gloved hands. "We weren't starving, but we were caught. Always caught." "I will sign it all over," Arthur said. "The estate, the London house, the investments. I have already instructed my new solicitors to draft the transfer. It will leave me with my mother's small inheritance, enough to live simply. You will be the wealthiest woman in England by morning." Sarah was silent for a long time. She watched the fog swirl against the glass. "I don't want it," she said finally. Arthur blinked. "What? I don't want the estate," Sarah said firmly. "I don't want to manage tenant farmers or host balls for people who despise me. I don't want to be a duchess in all but name." "It is your right. It is justice." "Justice is not burdening myself with your guilt, Arthur," she snapped. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "My father wanted his invention to change the world. He didn't care about the money. He cared about the machine. He wanted to build the great Western Railway engines." "Then what do you want?" Arthur asked, confused. Sarah smiled, a small, dangerous smile that Arthur had never seen before. "I want to ruin the men who helped your father. You said there were bribes, sabotage. I want the names. I want to use the Ashbourne money and influence to destroy the corrupt network that crushed my father. And I need a partner to do it." Arthur stared at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the intelligence that had been stifled by years of poverty. He realized with a jolt that the girl he had pitied was actually the most dangerous person in the carriage. "You want me to help you take down the Board of Trade?" Arthur asked slowly. "I want you to keep your title," Sarah said. "I want you to keep the estate. But you will manage it under my direction. You will be the face, but I will be the mind. We will be partners. And our first target is the man who signed the fraudulent patent in 1824. Arthur frowned. "Who was it?" Sarah reached into her reticule and pulled out a small notebook. "Lord Harrington, the man who hosted the ball tonight." Arthur let out a low, incredulous laugh. "You want to take down the Earl of Harrington?" "He betrayed my father," Sarah said coldly, "and now I'm going to take his ships, his mills, and his pride. Are you with me, Arthur? Or should I ask the driver to let me out?" Arthur looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. He didn't see a wallflower. He saw a queen in the making. "I'm with you," he whispered. "Good," Sarah said, sitting back. "Because we have a problem." "What problem?" "Lady Cecilia," Sarah said. "She didn't faint. I saw her face before we left. She wasn't defeated, Arthur. She was plotting. If she has a copy of the deed, and she's as vindictive as you say, she won't just try to expose us. She'll try to kill us." As if on cue, the carriage suddenly lurched violently to the left. The sound of wood splintering filled the air. The horses screamed. The carriage tilted gravity, losing its hold, and slammed onto its side, skidding across the cobblestones in a shower of sparks. The world was upside down. That was Sarah's first thought as consciousness came rushing back to her in a wave of throbbing pain. The carriage lay on its side like a slain beast, the darkness inside absolute, save for the flickering light of a street lamp filtering through the shattered window. "Sarah." The voice was ragged, panic-stricken. A hand gripped her shoulder, strong, desperate. "Arthur," she rasped, coughing as dust and horsehair filled her lungs. "Thank God," he breathed. "Don't move. There's glass everywhere." Arthur kicked at the carriage door above them. It groaned but didn't budge. He swore a harsh, guttural sound and struck it again with his shoulder, putting his entire weight into the blow. With a screech of tortured metal, the latch gave way, and the door swung open to the foggy London night. He climbed out first, then reached down into the wreckage. "Give me your hand. Trust me." Sarah reached up. Her grey dress was torn at the sleeve, and she felt a warm trickle of blood running down her forehead, but she grasped his hand. He pulled her up with surprising strength, lifting her clear of the jagged glass and setting her down on the cold cobblestones. The scene was a nightmare. One of the horses was down, its breathing shallow. The driver, an older man named Silas, who had served the Pendleton family for 30 years, was thrown against a brick wall, motionless. Arthur rushed to him, checking for a pulse. He stayed crouched for a long moment, his back rigid. When he stood up, his face was a mask of cold fury. "He's dead," Arthur said, his voice devoid of emotion, which was far more terrifying than if he had screamed. Sarah stumbled toward the wreckage of the carriage. She wasn't looking at the body. She was looking at the wheels. Her father had taught her mechanics. She knew how things worked, and more importantly, how they broke. She knelt in the mud, ignoring the ruin of her dress, and ran her fingers along the snapped axle. "Arthur," she called out. He was at her side in an instant. "What is it? Look at the grain of the wood here," she said, pointing to the fracture. "It's smooth, too smooth." She adjusted her spectacles, which had miraculously survived, though one lens was cracked. This wasn't an accident. Someone took a saw to the axle. They cut it halfway through and filled the gap with dark wax to hide it. It was timed to snap as soon as we hit speed on the cobblestones. Arthur stared at the sabotage. The implications settled over them like a shroud. "Cecilia," he whispered. "She didn't just want to ruin me. She wanted to erase us." "We cannot go to your townhouse," Sarah said, her mind racing, calculating the variables. "If she thinks we're dead or injured, that buys us time. If we show up at Ashbourne House, her spies will know within the hour. She'll try again." Arthur looked at her, impressed by her composure. Most debutantes would be swooning. Sarah Evesham was analyzing the tactical situation. "I have a hunting lodge," Arthur said. "Blackwood Manor. It's 20 miles north near Epping Forest. It's been shuttered for years. No staff. No one knows I go there. Can we get horses? We'll take the uninjured one from the trace," Arthur said, moving to unbuckle the terrified gelding. "Can you ride? I grew up in the country, Arthur," she said, ripping a strip of fabric from her petticoat to bind the cut on her forehead. "I can ride." They left the body of Silas to be found by the night watch, a decision that pained Arthur visibly, but they had no choice. They mounted the horse, Arthur in the saddle, and Sarah clinging to his waist from behind. They vanished into the fog, leaving the wreckage of the Duke's life burning on the street behind them. The ride to Blackwood was a grueling ordeal. The mist turned to freezing rain, soaking them to the bone. Sarah pressed her face against Arthur's back, feeling the heat of him, the tension in his muscles. For 10 years she had watched him from afar, hating him for his father's sins, yet missing the boy who had been her only friend. Now, clinging to him in the dark, the hate was hard to find. They arrived at Blackwood Manor just before dawn. It was a grim stone structure overtaken by ivy standing alone on a wind-swept hill. Arthur broke the lock on the back door, and they stumbled into the kitchen. It smelled of dust and neglect. Arthur found a lantern and lit it. The light revealed Sarah's condition. She was pale, shaking from hypothermia, with dried blood on her face and mud caking her dress. "Sit," he commanded, pulling a dust sheet off a wooden chair. He moved to the fireplace, finding old logs stacked there. Within minutes, he had a fire roaring. He returned to her with a bowl of water and a clean rag he'd found in a drawer. "Let me see your head." "I can do it," she murmured, reaching for the cloth. "Sarah," he said, gently, catching her wrist. "Let me." He wiped the blood from her brow with a tenderness that belied his size. His fingers grazed her temple. Sarah looked up at him, her mismatched eyes wide behind the cracked lens of her glasses. "Why did you really walk past her?" Sarah asked softly. You could have just cancelled the engagement privately. You didn't have to destroy your social standing." Arthur paused, his hand resting on her cheek. The firelight danced in his dark eyes. "Because I looked across the room and I saw you. And I remembered that the only time in my life I felt like a decent man was when I was 12 years old, sitting in an oak tree with you talking about steam engines." He pulled back, his expression hardening again. "I became the Duke everyone wanted me to be. Ruthless, cold, and it rotted me from the inside out. When I found that letter, when I realized everything I had was stolen from you, it was the first time I felt clean. I had to kneel, Sarah. It was the only way to start over." Sarah reached out and took his hand. "We aren't starting over, Arthur. We are going to war. With Harrington, with all of them," she said, the fire reflecting in her eyes. "Harrington, Cecilia, the Board of Trade. They think they are untouchable because of their titles, but they are building their empires on machines they don't understand and money they don't have. I know the weakness of the steam engine, Arthur, and I know the weakness of men like Harrington." "And what is that?" "Greed," Sarah said. "They are greedy, and greed makes you blind." Arthur looked at the wallflower he had ignored for a decade, and he felt a surge of admiration so strong it nearly knocked the wind out of him. "What is the plan, Miss Evesham?" Sarah took off her broken glasses and set them on the table. "Harrington is launching the Leviathan next week, the largest steamship ever built. It uses my father's stolen patent for the high-pressure governor. Yes, it's the talk of the city. If that ship succeeds, Harrington's stock will triple." "It won't succeed," Sarah said calmly, "because my father's design had a flaw he fixed in his second draft, the draft he never wrote down because he died. The patent Harrington stole is incomplete. If they run those engines at full capacity, the pressure valves will fuse." "Will it explode?" Arthur asked, alarmed. "No, it will simply stop. Dead in the water, in the middle of the Atlantic." Sarah's smile was razor-sharp. "But we aren't going to let it get that far. We are going to let Harrington bet his entire fortune on that ship, and then we are going to make sure everyone knows it's a lemon before it ever leaves the dock." 3 days later. London was a hornet's nest of gossip. The newspapers were running wild with headlines. "Duke and mystery woman vanish after carriage accident is the Duke." "Mad." And Lady Cecilia, the victim of a lunatic. Lady Cecilia Thorne sat in the drawing room of Lord Harrington, sipping tea that cost more than a servant's yearly wages. She was dressed in black, a performance of mourning for her troubled former fiancé. Lord Harrington was a corpulent man with a red face and mutton-chop whiskers. He paced the room, a cigar clamped between his teeth. "It's a disaster, Cecilia," Harrington grunted. "The police found the driver dead. No sign of Ashbourne or the girl. If he's dead, the estate goes into probate. The creditors will descend. I have loans tied to his name." "He isn't dead," Cecilia said coolly. "Arthur is too stubborn to die in a ditch. He's hiding, which means he's planning something." "What can he do?" Harrington scoffed. "He humiliated himself. He admitted to being a fraud in front of 500 witnesses. No one will listen to him." "They will if he has the deed," Cecilia snapped. "We need to control the narrative. We need to have him declared mentally incompetent. The outburst at the ball, the kneeling, the rambling about stolen patents, it's perfect. We find a doctor to testify that the Duke has lost his mind. I will petition for conservatorship as his fiancé." "Ex-fiancé," Harrington corrected. "The engagement was never officially broken." Cecilia smiled cruelly. "He walked past me, he didn't speak to me. Legally, I am still the future Duchess. Once he is committed to an asylum, I will control the Ashbourne assets, and I will burn that deed. And the girl, the Evesham girl. Cecilia waved her hand dismissively. She's a nobody. If she surfaces, we'll say she's a harlot who seduced a madman. No one cares about a wallflower. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the drawing room burst open. "My lord," the butler gasped, looking pale. "I tried to stop him, but—" Arthur Pendleton strode into the room. He looked different. He was shaved. His clothes were immaculate, a dark blue frock coat cut to perfection, and he carried a gold-topped cane. But it was his air that had changed. The sullen, reluctant Duke was gone. In his place was a man vibrating with dangerous energy. "Arthur!" Cecilia gasped, standing up, her teacup rattling in its saucer. "You're alive!" "We were so worried." "Save it, Cecilia," Arthur said, his voice smooth. He didn't look at her. He looked straight at Harrington. "Lord Harrington, I hear you are looking for investors for the Leviathan." Harrington narrowed his eyes. "You have some nerve showing your face here, Ashbourne. After the stunt you pulled." "A moment of clarity," Arthur said, walking to the sideboard and pouring himself a brandy without asking. "I realized I had been living a lie. But the truth, Harrington, is that I am still the Duke of Ashbourne until the House of Lords says otherwise, and I have money to spend." "You said your fortune belonged to the girl," Harrington sneered. "The girl," Arthur said, taking a sip, "has authorized me to invest it. She is quite business-minded." Harrington and Cecilia exchanged a glance. "What are you playing at?" Cecilia hissed. "No games," Arthur said. "I want in on the Leviathan. I want to buy 40% of the shares." Harrington laughed. "The shares are already allocated, and why would I sell to you you're a liability?" "Because I know you're over-leveraged," Arthur said softly. "I know you borrowed against your textile mills to build that ship. I know that if the Leviathan doesn't launch on schedule next week, the banks will call in your loans. You need liquid cash, Harrington, and I have £50,000 sitting in a slush fund that my father left off the books." Harrington stopped laughing. Greed, as Sarah had predicted, flickered in his eyes. £50,000 was a fortune. It would secure his empire. "Cash?" Harrington asked. "Gold." Arthur lied effortlessly. "Delivered tomorrow, in exchange for a seat on the board and 40% of the stock." "Arthur, don't," Cecilia warned, sensing a trap. "Quiet, Cecilia," Harrington snapped. He looked at Arthur. "Bring the gold to White's Club tonight. We'll sign the papers there." "Excellent," Arthur said. He finished his brandy and turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked at Cecilia. "By the way, my dear, that red dress didn't suit you. It was too desperate." He walked out before she could scream. That night, White's Gentlemen's Club. The gambling hell of the aristocracy was thick with smoke and the smell of roasted meats. When Arthur entered the room, went silent. Eyes followed him. Whispers of Mad Duke and scandal hissed through the air. Arthur ignored them. He walked to the private card table in the back where Lord Harrington held court. "You came," Harrington said, looking at the heavy leather satchel Arthur carried. "I always pay my debts," Arthur said, placing the bag on the table. "Shall we sign? Let's see the gold first," Harrington said. Arthur opened the bag. Inside were stacks of gold bars. The men around the table gasped. It was mesmerizing. Harrington licked his lips. He pushed a contract across the table. 40%. Non-voting shares. "Voting," Arthur corrected. "Or I walk." Harrington hesitated, then shrugged. Fine. Voting. He scribbled the change. Arthur signed his name with a flourish. Harrington signed his. The deal was done. Pleasure doing business. Harrington grinned, reaching for the bag. One more thing. Arthur said, his hand clamping over Harrington's wrist. The grip was iron. A wager. I have your money, Ashbourne. Why would I wager? Because you're a gambling man. Arthur said, his voice dropping low. And because I'm willing to bet my remaining estate, Ashbourne Park itself, against your patent. The room went deathly silent. Ashbourne Park was one of the largest estates in England. The patent? Harrington asked, confused. The steam governor? Yes, the one you registered in 1824. Why do you want an old piece of paper? Sentimental value? Arthur smiled. My father worked so closely with you on it. If I win, I get the original patent documents and full rights to the design. If you win, you get Ashbourne Park. Lock, stock, and barrel. Harrington's mind raced. The patent was old technology. The Leviathan was already built. He didn't need the paper anymore. And Ashbourne Park. He could sell the land for millions. It was the bet of the century. What is the game? Harrington asked. High card, Arthur said. One cut of the deck. Pure luck. Done, Harrington said, his eyes gleaming. A fresh deck was brought. The dealer shuffled. The tension in the room was suffocating. You first, Arthur said. Harrington reached out his hand, sweating. He cut the deck and flipped the top card. The King of Diamonds. A roar went up from the crowd. Unbeatable, someone shouted. Harrington takes it. Harrington laughed, a booming, victorious sound. Looks like you're homeless, Your Grace. The king is hard to beat. Arthur didn't flinch. He looked at the deck. He didn't look nervous. He looked like a man who knew something no one else did. Sarah sends her regards, Arthur whispered. Who? Arthur reached out and cut the deck. He flipped the card. The ace of spades. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. The ace beat the king. No, Harrington choked. That's impossible. Luck is a funny thing, Arthur said, scooping up the contract and the patent transfer Harrington had hastily signed in anticipation of the bet. He shoved them into his coat pocket. And now I own 40% of your company. And I own the patent the Leviathan is built on. Arthur stood up. And as the majority owner of the patent, Lord Harrington, I am issuing a cease and desist order effective immediately. You are using my technology without a license. If the Leviathan leaves the dock, I will sue you for every penny you have. And since I now own 40% of your company, I will vote to liquidate your assets to pay the legal fees. Harrington turned purple. You tricked me. This is fraud. No, Arthur said coldly. This is business. He turned to the crowd. Gentlemen, I suggest you sell your Harrington shipping stock in the morning. I have it on good authority. The company is about to implode. Arthur walked out of the club, leaving Harrington screaming in the center of the room. Outside in the shadows of the alley, a carriage was waiting. Not a ducal carriage, but a nondescript hackney. Arthur climbed in. Sarah was sitting there, a stack of ledgers on her lap. She looked at him over the rim of her new simple wire-rimmed glasses. Did he take the bait? She asked. Hook, line, and sinker. Arthur said, the adrenaline crashing through him. He sat back, loosening his cravat. We own the patent, and we own nearly half his company. We have him by the throat. Sarah didn't smile. She was looking at a ledger. It's not enough. Not enough, Sarah, we just destroyed his liquidity. I found something in the public records while you were inside. Sarah said, her voice grave. Harrington isn't the top of the pyramid. He was paying someone. Look at these transfers. She held up the book. Regular payments, large sums, going to an account managed by a shell company in the Caribbean. But the signatory, Arthur squinted at the name in the dim light. Vance? Who is Vance? Not Vance, Sarah corrected. Look closer at the handwriting. It's a pseudonym. The initials. C.T. Arthur froze. Cecilia Thorne. She wasn't just his mistress's rival, Sarah said. She's been orchestrating the theft of patents for years. She finds the inventors, Harrington crushes them, and they split the profits. She's the spider, Arthur. Harrington is just the fly. Arthur felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night air. Then she knows. She knows we're coming, Sarah said. And now that you've humiliated Harrington, she's going to stop playing with politics. What will she do? Sarah closed the ledger with a heavy thud. She's going to burn Blackwood Manor to the ground, with us inside it. The return to Blackwood Manor was a race against a clock they couldn't see. The fog had lifted, leaving the countryside bathed in a stark, unforgiving moonlight that made the shadows of the trees look like grasping fingers. If she knows we are here, Arthur said, urging the tired hackney horses up the gravel drive. She won't send a solicitor. She will send fire. Sarah sat clutching the ledger to her chest. She won't burn the house down yet, Arthur. She needs the ledger. If she destroys the house with the proof of her embezzlement inside, she destroys her own safety net. She needs to find us, kill us, and then burn the evidence. You think like a criminal? Arthur noted a hint of admiration in his voice. I think like an engineer, Sarah corrected. I look for the point of failure. And right now, the point of failure is the house itself. It's a trap. They burst through the front doors of the manor. The fire Arthur had lit earlier had died down to embers. The house was silent, but it felt different. The air was heavy, smelling faintly of lamp oil. Arthur, Sarah whispered, freezing in the hallway. Do not light a candle. Why? Smell, she commanded. Arthur inhaled. Beneath the scent of old wood and dust, there was a sharp chemical tang. Kerosene. They've already been here. Sarah realized, her heart plummeting. They soaked the floorboards. They are waiting for us to walk in. Before Arthur could respond, a slow clapping echoed from the darkness of the upper landing. Bravo, Miss Evesham, a voice purred. I was told you were a mouse, but it seems you are a rat. And rats are excellent at sniffing out traps. A match was struck. The sudden flare of light was blinding. Standing at the top of the stairs, illuminated by the flame in her hand, was Lady Cecilia. She was no longer wearing the mourning black she had donned for tea with Harrington. She was dressed in men's riding leathers, a pistol tucked into her belt. Flanking her were 3 men, rough-scarred, the kind of men bought with cheap gin and gold coins in the back alleys of Whitechapel. Cecilia, Arthur said, stepping in front of Sarah. Put the match out. The fumes alone will kill us all. That is the point, darling. Cecilia smiled. She held the match dangerously close to the banister, which glistened with oil. You humiliated me. You rejected me for this frumpy little intense creature. Did you think I would let you walk away with my money? It's not your money. Sarah spoke up, her voice trembling but loud. It's stolen. We have the ledgers, Lady Cecilia. We know about the Caribbean accounts. We know you've been bleeding Harrington dry for years." Cecilia's eyes flashed with cold fury. "Harrington is a pig. I merely took what was owed to me for tolerating his cigars and his idiocy. And you little girl are going to hand over that book. If you do, I might let you burn quickly. If not, well, my friends here have knives." She nodded to the thugs. 2 of them began to descend the stairs, their boots crunching on the oil-soaked wood. "Arthur," Sarah whispered, her mind racing. "The dumbwaiter." "It's too small," Arthur hissed back without moving his lips. "Not for me, for the book." "I am not leaving you." "You aren't," she said. "Trust me. When I scream, shoot the chandelier." "What?" "Trust me." One of the thugs lunged. Arthur moved with the speed of a soldier, drawing the pistol he had taken from the carriage wreckage. He fired not at the man, but at the massive crystal chandelier hanging above the foyer. The gunshot was deafening. The bullet shattered the chain. The massive fixture, weighing hundreds of pounds, plummeted. Cecilia screamed as the chandelier crashed into the stairs between her and her henchman, sending shards of crystal flying like shrapnel. The impact shook the floorboards. "Now!" Sarah yelled. She didn't run for the door. She ran deeper into the house towards the kitchen. "Get them!" Cecilia shrieked, firing her own pistol wildly. A bullet splintered the doorframe near Arthur's head as he sprinted after Sarah. They burst into the kitchen. Sarah threw the ledger into the iron dumbwaiter box and hauled on the ropes, sending it shooting up into the stone walls of the chimney chase, safe from the coming fire. "The cellar," Sarah commanded, grabbing a heavy iron key from a hook by the stove. "Sarah, we're trapping ourselves," Arthur yelled as he slammed the kitchen door and barred it. The thugs were already pounding on it, the wood splintering under their axes. "The coal chute," Sarah cried, unlocking the heavy oak door to the cellar. They tumbled down the stone steps into the pitch black of the basement. Above them they heard the whoosh of ignition. Cecilia had dropped the match. The heat was instantaneous. The floorboards above them caught fire with a roar like a dragon waking up. Smoke began to pour through the cracks in the ceiling. "Over here." Sarah coughed, dragging Arthur toward the far wall, where the coal chute led up to the garden. But as they reached it, the cellar door at the top of the stairs flew open. One of the thugs stood there, silhouetted against the raging inferno behind him. He raised a rifle. Arthur didn't think. He shoved Sarah behind a stack of coal barrels and charged the stairs. The gun went off. Ideally, Arthur would have dodged. Realistically, the bullet tore through his left shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the ground with a grunt of pain. "Arthur!" Sarah screamed. The thug laughed, racking another round. "Duchess wants you dead." "Your Grace." Sarah looked around wildly. She saw the main valve for the house's boiler system. It was an ancient high-pressure system, hissing steam. Her father's design. She knew exactly how much pressure it could take. She grabbed a heavy shovel from the coal pile. She didn't attack the man. She swung the shovel with all her might at the pressure release valve on the boiler tank. Clang! The valve snapped off. A jet of superheated steam, pressurized to 60 pounds per square inch, exploded outward. It hit the thug squarely in the chest. He didn't even have time to scream before the force of the blast knocked him backward, sending him tumbling back into the burning hallway above. "Come on!" Sarah yelled, the cellar filling with white, scalding mist. She grabbed Arthur, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder. Adrenaline gave her the strength of 10 women. She hauled him up the coal chute, clawing at the wet earth, pushing him out into the cool night air. They collapsed on the grass, gasping for breath. Behind them, Blackwood Manor was a torch. Flames licked the roof, illuminating the night sky for miles. Arthur groaned, his face pale. "Sarah, did we win?" Sarah looked at the burning house. She saw a figure in the window of the upper floor. Cecilia trapped by her own fire, the stairs destroyed by the chandelier. But Sarah turned away. She couldn't save her. No one could. "No," Sarah said, tearing her petticoat again to bind Arthur's wound. "We haven't won yet. Surviving isn't winning. Winning is making sure Harrington pays for everything." She looked at Arthur, her eyes hard and bright. "Can you stand your grace?" Arthur looked at her. He saw the soot on her face, the blood on her hands, the fire in her eyes. He had never loved anyone more. "For you," he whispered, "I could fly." November 12th, 1842. The Royal Docks, London. The launch of the Leviathan was the event of the decade. A brass band played patriotic tunes. Bunting in red, white, and blue draped the massive hull of the steamship that loomed over the crowd like a steel mountain. Lord Harrington stood on the podium sweating profusely, despite the chill wind coming off the Thames. He looked terrible. His eyes were dotting around the crowd. He hadn't heard from Cecilia in a week. She had vanished. The rumors said she had fled to France, but Harrington had a sinking feeling in his gut that was far worse. "My lords, ladies and gentlemen," Harrington bellowed, his voice cracking slightly. "Today we usher in a new era of British dominance. The Leviathan is unsinkable, unstoppable." The crowd cheered politely, but the murmurs were there. Everyone had heard the gossip about the Mad Duke and the missing patent. "I give you—" Harrington raised a bottle of champagne, ready to smash it against the hull. "Wait." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the crowd like a knife. It was amplified by a strange, horn-shaped device being held by a woman standing on top of a stack of cargo crates. The crowd turned. Sarah Evesham stood there. She wore a dress of deep midnight blue velvet, bought with the last of Arthur's ready cash. She looked regal, terrifying. Beside her stood the Duke of Ashbourne, his arm in a sling, looking pale, but resolute. "That ship will not sail," Sarah announced. "Seize them!" Harrington screamed, pointing a trembling finger. "They are trespassers! They are mad!" Two constables moved forward, but Arthur stepped in front of Sarah. He raised his good hand, holding a document with the royal seal. "We are not trespassers," Arthur declared. "I am the majority shareholder of Harrington Shipping, and I am halting this launch by order of the Crown." A gasp went through the crowd. "You lie!" Harrington shrieked. "You have no authority. I have the patent," Arthur said, holding up the yellowed parchment. "And I have the testimony of the Royal Engineers who examined your engines this morning." Sarah stepped forward. She lowered the speaking trumpet. Lord Harrington ignored the safety protocols of the Evesham governor. She said, her voice clear and carrying to the reporters, scribbling furiously in the front row. "He bypassed the pressure release valves to save money on copper. If you launch that ship, the boilers will detonate before you reach the Isle of Wight." "She's a hysterical woman," Harrington yelled. "She knows nothing of mechanics." "I know everything," Sarah shot back. "I drew the schematics you stole. I am the daughter of Thomas Evesham, the man you ruined, and I am telling you that ship is a bomb." The crowd began to back away from the ship. The fear was palpable. "Prove it," Harrington challenged, cornered and desperate. "Fire the engines. "We'll show them." He signaled the captain on the deck. The captain, looking unsure, pulled the whistle. The massive paddle wheels began to turn. Steam hissed from the stacks. Sarah didn't flinch. She took a pocket watch from her belt. 30 seconds, she said calmly. "What?" Harrington froze. "The pressure builds exponentially without the governor valve," Sarah explained like a teacher lecturing a slow student. "At 30 seconds, the rivets on the port boiler will fail." "Turn it off!" Harrington screamed at the captain. "Too late," Sarah whispered. Screech! A sound like a dying banshee ripped through the air. A jet of white steam erupted from the side of the Leviathan, punching a hole through the steel plating. The crowd screamed and scrambled back. The paddle wheel shuddered and ground to a halt. The ship didn't unexplode. Sarah had been right about that too. But it died. It died loudly, publicly, and embarrassingly. It sat in the water, a broken, hissing ruin. Harrington fell to his knees on the podium. He knew in that moment it was over. The stock would plummet to zero within the hour. The investors would want blood. Arthur walked up the steps of the podium. He looked down at the man who had destroyed his childhood and Sarah's life. "The constabulary is waiting for you, Harrington," Arthur said quietly. "They have the ledger. They know about the Caribbean accounts. They know about Cecilia." Harrington looked up, tears streaming down his red face. "Where is she? Where is Cecilia?" Arthur leaned in close. "She stayed at Blackwood. She went down with the ship." Harrington sobbed. Arthur turned to the crowd. He reached down and pulled Sarah up to the podium beside him. "This design," Arthur announced, gesturing to the broken ship, "was a stolen, bastardized version of a genius invention. The true Evesham engine, the one that works, will be built next year by the new Evesham Ashbourne Engineering Company." He looked at Sarah. "Led by its chief engineer, Miss Sarah Evesham." The crowd, realizing they had witnessed history, began to cheer. Not polite applause, but a roar of approval. They loved a scandal, but they loved a hero more. Sarah looked out at the sea of faces. She didn't feel invisible anymore. She felt seen. She looked at Arthur. "We have a lot of work to do. The company will need a board of directors." "I'm not interested in the board." Arthur smiled, taking her hand with his good one. "I'm interested in the engineer." "Is that a proposal, Your Grace?" Sarah asked, arching an eyebrow. "No," Arthur said, dropping to one knee again, right there on the podium in front of all of London. "This is a beg. Marry me, Sarah, not for the money, not for the guilt, but because you are the only person who ever saw me when I was standing in the dark." Sarah adjusted her glasses. She looked at the ruined ship, the ruined villain, and the man kneeling before her. "Get up, Arthur," she said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him, shocking the reporters one last time. "We have a steam engine to build, and that is the incredible true-to-life drama of the Duke and the Wallflower. From the depths of poverty to the heights of industrial power, Sarah Evesham didn't just marry a duke. She saved him. And in doing so, she reshaped the history of London. Lord Harrington spent the rest of his days in Newgate Prison, and the Leviathan was eventually scrapped to build the first railway line connecting the north to the south, a line designed by Sarah herself. If you enjoyed this story of justice, romance, and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, do you think Arthur deserved forgiveness for how he treated Sarah in the beginning? Or did he earn his redemption? I'll see you in the next video.